Today we get to start part 8 of our NATT how to twin turbo your NA300ZX series. So basically I'm a little late for this video because here we are back with my slick top, even though after last video that we put it in this car we had wiring harness problems. The whole drivetrain has been pulled out and completely put back in since then. So now we have everything hooked up here. Now what brings us to today's video is we're actually going to be working on installing some gauges. So you want to install some gauges to help you kind of monitor and know what's going on with your car, so that way you can keep an eye on it and ensure everything is working properly. There's a ton of gauges you can go with and use. However, there are 4 that I actually have right now. One of them is a boost gauge. It's not really for a boost gauge, it's my boost controller. So I don't use a boost gauge because I have a boost controller. So it works for a 2-in-1. Another thing I recommend is having a coolant temp sensor, so you can get an actual reading on your coolant temp, because if you know much about the Z's, it has no way of telling the exact temperature. And well, the stock temperature gauge is actually known to be, not truthful. When it goes up to middle, when it's warm, is when it hits 100 degrees. Anything under that, it stays at cold. When you hit 200 degrees, when it's too late, that's when it says it's hot. So usually when it says it's too hot, it's about too late. So anytime it gets there, cut it off. So there are 2 other gauges that are going to require us to get under the car to show how we have them hooked up. But that is a wideband gauge, so we can read our air fuel ratio and know if our car is tuned correctly and running properly. The other one is pretty crucial, and that is an oil pressure sensor. I have seen temp and oil pressure sensors built into one, so I would recommend grabbing one of those, to be honest, just so you can be on the safe side of things. If you know much about the Nissan 300ZX, then you definitely know that these stock oil pressure gauges are known to be faulty. My daily, I can fire it up, it'll read fine. I can drive it for 10 minutes and it drops to 1 PSI. I don't fret, I know it runs and drives fine, so this is another extra security or peace of mind that you can add to your car so you feel better while driving it. So I have a sandwich plate on right here that I have an oil pressure sensor connected to. Other than that, on this downpipe, I actually have a bung for a wideband sensor, which it already has the sensor, so I'm just going to use the harness and the gauge so we can set it up. And here are the gauges. This is our boost controller. We have a Greddy profec. Over here we have an AEM oil pressure gauge and a temperature gauge. So now let's pull our wideband out. Let's get all that situated, and then let's grab some tools and move on to the car so we can start disassembling it, putting some stuff together. I am going to leave a disclaimer right here for you guys. This is not the best way to do it. I'm going to say that now because this is how I've done it and how I figured out or managed to do it. I'm not an electrician. I'm not an automotive electronic guy at all. This works. I'm using vampire clips. Yeah, I know, shoot me now, but that's what I know how to do. And until I can figure out what I can wire in with the battery, kind of like how I hardwire my fuel pump, to where I can get just like a fuse block that I can run stuff to, this is how I'm going to do it. I would like to do it better and proper, but I'm limited to my own knowledge right now. So if it works, send it. Before we do anything, we're actually going to be taking the AC condenser box out so we can get access to that port right there. That's where we're going to be running all of our wires, since we don't have AC in this car. If you do have AC, if you don't want to do this, there's a couple other ways. So if you don't have AC, there's actually a hole down here for your AC condenser drain. And you can actually use that to feed wires through. That's what I usually use. But since I came up with this other method, the last build I did, this is what I'm going to use. If you have an NA, there will be a little grommet up here, somewhere that you can feed wires through. You can depin the connectors, make it to where you can fish it through, repin said connectors, and then hook your gauges up. I've also seen one other way of people doing it other than drilling through the firewall. That's the last resort for me. You can run it pretty much up here through your door harness, from where the harness comes here and into the chassis itself. Or there is actually a plug in your driver rail which you get access to about right here if you pull your carpet back, which is in turn like right behind this, and then you can feed your stuff down through this and through that hole. That's just either how I've done it or how I've seen it done. You can get creative, do it however you think you can pull it off, or you know you can pull it off. Now we need to start removing some interior. I actually had to test fit these to make sure this bezel worked. It does, thankfully. So you're gonna need to pull off this, so you can get access to these little side pieces, but we're actually gonna pull the glove box too. If you still have this trim down here below, you'll have like 4 plastic screws. You'll thread them out, pop them out, and you have 2 10 mils for your glove box and 1 Phillips right here. Now this is where pulling this comes into play. You need to pull it up enough that you can remove these 2 Phillips, pop these caps off, and then there's 2 10 mil bolts beneath that. Push this little corner down because it actually has a tab right there that locks it behind this, and then it should just flop off like that. If it doesn't, you have these 2 little aligning tabs that go here. Next, it's time to remove the glove box. You should have a screw pretty much in each corner, actually 10 mil, and then the screw right here. You'll have 1 10 mil up here. Remove those and you should be able to bend and fold your bracket out of the way. This can be tricky sometimes, just take your time. And there's actually 2 bullet connectors up here, which are actually broken on my car. Those are just these connectors, they just separate from themselves. Just pop this out, just push it in, pull it out, and we have 1 more HVAC duct. Now to pull your AC core out, you'll obviously need to disconnect your 2 AC lines up in the bay and a 10 mil right here. You also have 2 10 mils right here at the base that hold this down to this little bracket in the footwell. Your main focus is this, clearing this mount up here. And this is what we created, so that way we don't have to have that condenser in there. Now with all of that out, we actually have pretty much all the access in the world up here. And those are the 2 grommets or holes that we'll be going through. There's the AC drain that I was speaking of. Now the wiring portion comes into play. We're actually going to pull this off so that way we can get a little bit more room or access to fit some stuff through. Plenty of room. So wiring these gauges is pretty simple, I would say. You're going to hook up everything according, you know, like connector wise. You're going to hook it up to each other, but you'll have your wires for your gauges. Odds are there's going to be a couple extra wires sometimes, like this. I have no idea what these are for, but I know red is power. So we'll supply power to the red, and we have the black going over here to a ground. So that goes for every gauge here, even our boost controller. Got our power wire and our ground. Power wire, ground. This wiring has words on it. Let's see. I'm gonna guess this is power and this is ground. These likely have something to do with being able to hook up to your ECU if you have a standalone. Now, good thing we have instructions in here so we can double check first. So I come over here and look at the gauge we already have wired up, and sure enough, red and black. Now let's actually start with the oil, pressure, and the coolant temp sensor wiring. One thing you want to keep in mind if you're using the bracket here, make sure to feed it through the bracket before you put it through the firewall. If not, you won't be able to put the bracket in. You can get as creative as you want here, but we're really just pulling our wiring through, so in turn we can run our wiring straight back here and into our gauges. Now that we have both of these cables pulled up here for our gauges, we're actually going to do a little bit of cable management. Oil pressure sensors plugged in. You should be able to see the wire going over there. And we have our coolant temp routed down here. So for now, let's just mop up the plates, and we'll leave these cables about right here before we zip tie them. You know, keep them down and out the way. Because the last thing you want is any of this touching your exhaust, or just to be flexible enough that when it gets hot, it can move and touch your exhaust. melted wires are not good. Now we're actually going to run our boost controller while we're here. And all we need to do is run one wire over here to our MAC valve, which is right here, which is this right here. And then we have a vacuum source that we need to plug in to our fuel pressure regulator. That is then over here on this side. So let's go into the car and let's feed both of these through. Now we've got just about all of our wiring in. We went ahead and repaired this to this connector down for our wideband, but we still haven't pulled all that wiring through, so we're going to wire all this stuff up first. So we officially just took our last connector, crimped it, and got it ready so we can actually move on with wiring this stuff. So to assist with some cable management, I think we're actually going to hook up the majority of our gauges here so we can actually just have them sitting and pulling out the way instead of all these loose connectors in here. All of our gauges are plugged in and hooked up here. And now basically all we're going to do is we're going to take all 4 grounds to each of these. 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're going to hook all these up to a ground source. Now you can use your stereo ground back here if you want, but we're probably just going to come down here and bolt them up to this. Actually, we're going to run our grounds right here to this bracket. You can see there's some threaded holes from our old security relay or module, and we're no longer using that. I know I said I wasn't going to, but we actually just hooked all 4 of our grounds up and our radio ground all back there to the factory radio ground. Now, the reason I did that is a lot of these harnesses are split and have the ground and power from the exact same spot. So if I was to put both of, or all 3 of them down here, because the boost controller wouldn't fit, so if I put all 3 gauges down here, I would have to make a jumper wire to come up here and to our power source, which are these alligator clips. Vampire clips, sorry. These are frowned upon to some people because it's not really the proper way to do it. I'm sorry, Chris, I know that you really don't like this. So basically, to get your power source for all of these gauges are how I have these power hooked up. And these are actually male spades with the sheathing on it to protect it from touching anything else. And here in our radio wire, this is actually our accessory wire. So as soon as our key is turned on and it powers our head unit, it comes through this red wire right here in the back of the head unit. And this is from the factory side of the harness. So that means as soon as the key is switched on, this will give us our 12-volt source that we need to power our gauges. So let's actually plug a couple of these in, throw a jump pack on the car, turn the key, and see if we're getting power to all of our gauges now. So this is real time. I haven't checked. Oh, yep, we just flipped them over, and it appears we have voltage at each gauge. Now let's actually unplug one of these and see if our boost controller works. Survey says, hey, we've got power. So we've got to make these connections back here a little bit better. We got to cut back some of the sheathing, and then we just got to hook that up, and we'll have everything powered. Sweet, right? Now it's the evening, we're back, and pretty much all that there is to do now is we actually need to tuck and manage all of these wires. I know it's hard to see, sorry, but there's so many wires here. We need to manage these so we can put our evap box up here back in, and so none of the wires get in the way, and so we can kind of keep them out from back here, and we'll just kind of loop them and zip tie them all up and keep them stored back here with our ECU. So basically all we have to do is put everything back together, but before we do that, we actually ended up running our power wire for our fuel pump, which is this guy right here. So we ended up putting that through the bottom with our boost controller wiring here for our MAC valve. And now we're actually going to put our grommet in, so that way we can kind of pull all this together with that metal bracket. Ta-da! That is our finished product. I'd have to say it's pretty nice. Turns out I actually goofed up both of these holes, and I needed the 2 here on top, you know, so I had to put this grommet on backwards, and now you see these little slits. Well, at least you guys get to learn from my mistakes. Hit the power, make sure everything's working. Nice. Alrighty, looks like our job here is done. So we're actually going to put all this back together. I don't really feel the need to show all that. The order goes: clean up your wiring, install the HVAC box, install your 2 vents, glove box bracket, knee trim, glove box. Then you can mount this up and eventually mount this up. A little kind of half before and after. You didn't think I was going to do it all, did you? Well, here is my rendition of cable management. Zip tied a couple of them together, tucked the extra back here, and now everything's going to steer clear and be out the way. So let's put this evap box in. Box is in. Now for the final transformation, because I have absolutely no light and this is well under half charged. Ta-da! Got a fully functioning gauge system. Now let's actually go test this thing out. Shut the key off so we don't power up immediately. We've officially ran out of daylight and we've been fogging up the windshield. Now, how's this gonna look when we turn the key? Oh yeah, that connector doesn't feel right. Hold on, let's reseat that. We're back and let's give it a shot. Nice. Boost control. Yeah, there we go. Heck yeah. Did you get the job done, Tana? Yeah. Well, we got everything hooked up finally. One thing I guess I didn't really go over: if you're running just a boost gauge, all you need to do is have your power and ground and run a vacuum source anywhere to your manifold. Run it off your manifold after your throttle bodies. That will be your best source of vacuum. And there's also like a million kinds of gauges you can get, different brands, different types. You know, there's gauges for everything. So I covered pretty much what I consider the necessities, probably the basics at that. So hopefully this is enough to help you guys out and install some gauges in your NATT swap or any car at that. I mean, this pretty much applies all across the board. If you guys have any questions, just drop it in the comments below. I answer just about all questions and I definitely read them all at that. I know I may not have covered all my bases. I did the best that I could for a high humidity, high heat day. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe down below and stay tuned for our next video. Peace.